What's up, everybody? Apologize for the fact that I am sweaty as hell and shiny as hell. It's kind of hot out here right now,
Same.
if I don't say so myself.
You're glowing, babe.
I see that. I literally am glowing. It's like you could see somebody's reflection in my forehead. I'm not even joking. Look at it. Look at it. It's disgusting. Anyway, please ignore that. Ignore the fact that I'm a sweaty, grotesque monster. So, CNN. Let's talk a little bit about that because Brian Stelter was just fired. And this is something that people knew it was coming for a while. I think I mentioned it on my show a while ago because there were some articles hinting at it. You probably mentioned it on yours as well.
Yeah. We're pretty on top of the CNN beat over at Breaking
Yeah.
Points.
So let's get the easy part out of the way. Do you feel bad for him? My take is no, because I think he's sort of in over his head. He wasn't good at his job. He never really should have been hired in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I really don't feel bad at all. I think the more interesting conversation, and we could talk about this in a second, is what that says about the direction that CNN is going in.
Yes.
But in terms of feeling bad for Brian Stelter, no. He should have never been hired in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, just on his merits, ideology and palace intrigue at CNN and everything aside, like, he was lucky to have had the perch he had for as long as he had. Just looking at the ratings, like, not even my opinion of how he performs in the job. He got lucky to be there for the time that he was there.
Right. Now, the thing about what this says about CNN moving forward is interesting because there were some articles over the weekend that talked about how the reason they let him go is because, he's too partisan, basically. You think the real reason, and there's probably merit to this, is that actually he was just buddy-buddy with the previous CNN regime where it was Jeff Zucker.
I mean, I think the whole reason he was able to have that job and hold that job, given how manifestly not great at it he was, is because he was close to Jeff, and not just personally close, but he was willing to sort of carry the CNN line and propagandize for them when necessary. And that became really clear during the whole Chris Cuomo incident when Brian Stelter, who's supposed to be the media critic, I mean, his role is supposed to be critical of all the media, taking a critical lens of all the media, including his own boss and his own network. He never did that. It was always carrying whatever the official line was for them. So that was valuable for Zucker, and that's why he kept him around.
I mean, he defended Chris Cuomo when Chris Cuomo was caught, playing patty cakes with his brother.
Yeah.
Who was, diddling women behind the scenes and, letting old people die from COVID. There are all these problems, and he was just, defending Chris Cuomo, inviting on Andrew Cuomo to play patty cakes with him and pump him up like he's the best governor in the country.
Yeah, I mean, he went on late night TV and was just basically like, well, it's complicated. And
yeah, it's not at all complicated.
No, it's
it's so straightforward.
Very clear conflict of interest between the two brothers. Anyway, so I think that was his real usefulness on the network. Wasn't because he was a stellar television anchor or had sparkling commentary or intellect or anything like that. It was because when necessary, he was willing to toe whatever line Jeff Zucker wanted him to toe. Once Zucker was gone, Stelter was one of the ones who was pretty panicked, and pretty quickly after Zucker was ousted, rumors started to circulate that he might be one that was on the chopping block. So there you go.
So CNN is allegedly going to go in a more, quote, centrist direction. That's a quote from the new head, Chris Licht. That's his name?
Yeah.
Okay. So he says, there's too many partisan voices on here. We got to try to be more centrist. So here's the problem with that. CNN, the way it was functioning under Chris Cuomo, under Brian Stelter, under, the whole cadre that was there a year ago, let's say, they became MSNBC in the sense that they are the Democratic Party establishment defense network.
Yes.
They are the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party.
Correct.
So you have Fox News, which is the propaganda arm of the Republican Party, CNN and MSNBC, propaganda arm of the Democratic Party, and that's just not a good model. It's boring. It's annoying. They never say interesting things. But now,
yeah, and ends up to them, lying or missing stories and focusing on things that are silly or unimportant, all of that.
But now they're going back to CNN Classic. Now, for those of you who might be young and don't know the way CNN used to work, they used to have a bias towards neutrality and a bias towards the establishment generally, And I'd argue also maybe a bias towards sensationalism as well, right? So
Yeah,
you have those biases.
Certainly in the Zucker era in particular, the whole cruise ship fixations and the crashed flights and all that sort of stuff.
Right, exactly. Use the breaking news banner every 4 seconds, even when it's not breaking. They literally put breaking news: the Titanic sank 112 years ago today. That was an actual breaking news thing. I remember because I covered it on my show years ago, right? But that shows you where they are. So anyway, my question for you is, what's worse? A network that is effectively like rah Nancy Pelosi, rah Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden, or is it worse to have a network that's like, well, we have equally valid opinions from both Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer. You know, like, let's look at the wisdom on both sides in both parties, because old school CNN literally had on-air debates about climate change when it was already beyond obvious climate change was happening.
Yeah.
They had Bill Nye the Science Guy versus Marsha Blackburn, and they presented it like it was a 50-50 issue, which is terrible in its own respect, right? They had arguments over creationism intelligent design versus evolution. Like, it's stuff that's not debatable, but they were debating it.
Yeah.
That is CNN classic. Neutrality bias to the max. What's worse? Is it worse to be that, or is it worse to be, a Democratic partisan network?
It's close. It's hard to say, but I'm going to make the case it's the Fauxcentrism, like on the one hand and on the other hand thing, is actually worse because it confuses people more. When you see just very clearly they're carrying water for the Democratic Party, it's a little bit easier to sort out what's going on. And, if you were going to say which side between the terrible Democrats and the terrible Republicans are right more often, it would be the Democrats. So taking it from always following their line to giving the terrible Republicans 50% of the credibility and to the terrible Democrats 50% of the credibility, I guess it's better to be just the shameless partisan hacks. But I really think the reason why it's even maybe a little bit worse to do the faux equivalence centrist thing is because it's more confusing to the audience. And let me just say, I don't think it's a problem at all for a journalist or a news outlet to have an ideological lens, to have values, to have principles. I mean, it's really unavoidable, and to pretend otherwise is actually very dishonest, which is part of the issue I have with their whole, we're going to go more centrist thing. The problem is when you are carrying water for a person or a party or a powerful interest, and that is there's no principle or value involved. That ends up, with you focusing on things that are silly. It ends up you carrying water for people in power. It ends up you lying. It ends up in all sorts of ugly places. So I don't have an issue with an ideological lens. I do have an issue with just carrying water for one political party and, not being committed to any values or principles just to the furtherance of that party's power.
Yeah, okay, my take is very simple. I think they're equally bad. I mean, they're just bad and wrong and terrible in different ways. But in terms of my, gut visceral reaction to both CNN Classic and the MSNBC version of CNBC, or MSNBC version of CNN, excuse me, I react the same way to both of them. Because ultimately, at my core, what I've always wanted is some sort of a network that values the truth, the news, the facts, the data, and then also has intelligent, charismatic opinion on top of that, which obviously, from my perspective, would be sort of like an actual leftist network. But of course, you're never going to get that because of the influence of, the advertiser dollars and the corporations on our media and how it has to be run for a profit. And nobody ultimately is going to pay to have a network that's on air 24/7 saying, hey, raise taxes on the people who are funding my network.
Right.
Nobody's ever going to do, you know what I'm saying? So,
there's a reason why that doesn't exist.
Right. So ultimately, even though CNN's Brian Stelter being gone is kind of funny and he never should have been hired in the first place, it's not like better things are going to replace it.
It's not like this portends an improvement.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We love you. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.